Hey, we're live. So much for the 30-second intro, right?
That was no intro. That was an introless intro.
It was a third of a second intro. It was very brief. Welcome to SDHistCon and my honored guests, Gary Mengel and Ryan Heilman.
Hello.
Thanks for having us, Harold. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, look, it's good fun. I'm excited that you all are here. Mike is the first guest yet again to make a comment. No surprises there. He seems to be everywhere. I wonder, is there only one Mike or are there multiple mics?
There could be. He may have stolen the cloning technology from David Thompson, is our working hypothesis, actually.
Yes.
I mean, one person cannot play all the games that Mike has, so it would be optimal for him to clone himself.
Yeah. Well, congrats, Mike. Good luck with that technology. I hope we can make some money off of it, to be honest.
That'd be optimal, too.
Yeah. So we're here to talk about the Charles S. Roberts Awards, and the two of you play a big role in what that award system is today. So with that said, I'd love to talk a little bit about the history of the Charles S. Roberts Award before you all were involved, and I know that you've spent a good deal of time on that. So would love to hear the story. What is the history of the Charles S. Roberts Award?
So it's a little complicated because it was at one point an unofficial name until Charlie Roberts himself gave his blessing to use his name, but it was unofficially applied to the Origins Awards even prior to that. The Origins Awards / Charles S. Roberts Awards were started by a fellow named John Mansfield at Origins in 1975. And he stepped away. I'm not sure at some point. We don't have records of this, right? Our archives are scampy. Let me put it that way. Not that great. At some point, however, Roger McGowan became involved, and he is our honorary chairman at this point. Roger, however, has been extremely and pointedly hands off. He's invited as a blanket invite to any meetings that we may have, and I talk to Roger periodically. I ask Roger for help periodically, and he is happy to provide it. He's very generous with his time, but he is not officially involved in any way in our actual process.
Yeah, I've noted that he's very careful to avoid any perception of a conflict of interest.
Mm-hmm. And I haven't really had that conversation with him, but I feel like that is, in fact, the reason.
So Gary's much more versed on that history than I am. I mean, I know a lot about the history of the origins and whatnot, but the actual history of the awards, he's much more versed than I am. So I'm learning now as I'm listening to what he's saying. So thank you, Gary.
There was no problem. There was a split around 1987, and the urban legend, not confirmed, is that split occurred based on friction concerning awards given or nominations given to Milton Bradley's Fortress America. But I have a hunch it's more complicated than that, but that's kind of something we're still investigating, right? I don't have every old issue of Moves magazine that talks about this stuff, for example, or Fire and Movement, or any of the other periodicals that were around at the time.
I might.
Well, then we can talk later. You've got a lot of stuff too, Ryan.
I do. I might have quite a few of them. But the Origins Awards have continued on, obviously, and there's been kind of a split because, there are some people and some games and whatnot that have made it into the Origin Awards that aren't even in the Charles S. Roberts, and
including Roger, which is awkward. And eventually, that's a question we're going to have to answer, but we did not feel quite equipped to deal with it quite yet.
Yeah, well, it would seem easy to build a consensus on that topic in particular.
Yeah, extremely.
Yeah, there's no doubt. The topic of understanding the history of our hobby is very interesting to me. I talk a lot to Jason Matthews about how are we preserving the history? How are we preserving, just the knowledge of what's happened and the critical bits of data about what's happened. And, all that takes time and money, which is a tiny hobby we just don't have. And so it's yet another challenge for all of us.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ryan.
I was going to say, in general, I don't think we do a very good job of that. Gary stumbles upon things. I stumble upon things. Other people stumble upon things. A lot of times what do you do with it? Does it end up in the trash? Does it get preserved someplace? And it's a hard thing to do. We only have limited space in our houses and no place to store these things. And then there's no central repository of information either. I've been lucky enough to stumble upon some real gems in my time, including through Joanne Roberts. I got to see the first copy of his first game, Charles Roberts' first game, Tactics. And that was a real gem to see, but what do you do with that? Does that go to a museum? Does that go to somebody's house? And that's kind of the difficulty with that kind of thing. And that's not including all the magazines and all the prototypes and everything else that could be out there, as well as just the collective knowledge. And unfortunately, as you all know, we are in a hobby where people pass away. And as they do, we lose that knowledge. So it's good to try to get, as you said earlier, Harold, some of these young people in. They can start taking the mantle and getting some of that knowledge as well handed over to them.
In recent years, we've started to see, this is a recent development, last 10 years, in the role-playing space, we started to see gaming, that type of gaming, treated as a topic worthy of historiography. And we really haven't seen that yet in wargaming, which is interesting because wargaming is the older hobby populated by a demographic that I would presume skews older, right? But we've seen wonderful scholarly level works by, like, Playing at the World by John Peterson, which talks about the early history of Dungeons and Dragons and its evolution from wargaming. There's, like, the first half of the book talks about wargaming. We really haven't seen an equivalent thing. I have high hopes for Mark Herman's book that's coming out from GMT soon.
Yeah, I have high hopes and have read through it. It's something different. It's excellent, but something different, right? We may have to just charge ourselves to spend some time gathering a history and putting it into some sort of book or tome. And it's a little bit off topic, but there is a gentleman at Stanford University that works with the library. He was at the last SDHistCon in San Diego. And he's trying to reach out to some of the great designers in our part of the hobby and pull together some of the history. And I connected him with Mark Herman. I connected him with John Butterfield, and then, of course, Jason Matthews. And so, that could really be a promising opportunity of a well-funded entity if they're really interested in capturing some of our history to have a place to keep it and make it accessible. So.
And I think that's some of the stuff that we're looking to get to with the CSRs, because at this point we are not an official nonprofit entity, and we are moving towards that spot so that we can raise some money and then be able to do things like that. Preserving the history of even the awards themselves, which is
or have awards, like a physical thing that we send out to people. That'd be great.
Yes.
Yeah. I was helping John Hill's daughter resolve some of his assets after his passing a few years ago, and she said, "Is there anything you want?" And I said, "Well, not really." And then I thought about it, and she said, "He's got a CIA badge. Would you like the CIA badge?" And I said, "No, I don't. That's a little too personal.
That might be illegal for you to have it. In fact,
That's right. That's right. Well, I could." I mean, if I cut out a picture and put my face on it, I think it's okay.
I would advise consulting a practicing attorney on this topic.
All right. So not just you and Ryan, but
no, not an attorney, and not your attorney.
Well, we'll do. And since I haven't taken any action, but I did ask her. I said, "Are there any dice around that he played with?" And she sent me a box of his dice, which is just,
that's awesome.
Very cool, right? And if I had them at my fingertips, I'd show them to you. I'll show them to you another time. But it's little stuff like that I'm excited to have. But I'm also, like, geez, it would be nice, right? What if we had Richard Berg's dice and John Dunnigan's dice, and
I have a pair of one of the prize of my dice collection is a pair of percentile dice that were rolled by Gary Gygax in my presence. So,
wow. And he couldn't catch you after you grabbed them.
Well, they were my dice, so Gary wasn't stealing them.
Okay, all right.
Once you track him down and say, "Here, roll my dice real quickly."
No, this happened at Gen Con. He ran a demo of Dangerous Journeys, ironically enough, that I participated in.
Okay.
Well, all right. So we've already created one project, which is we've got to figure out how to document the history of the hobby in some sort of written form that allows us to share it with the future, right? So that's project one. Let's move on to project two. Thinking back through the history and talking to some of the great designers that we all know that were involved at the early days, got CSRs early. Mm-hmm. There was a very different sort of voting processes, right? There was some sort of not really a committee, but I don't know that it was a union, but some sort of trade group that would vote on these, right, early on. And then the people would vote, the people would nominate. You all have changed the iteration to something that seems very manageable. But how do you think about the history and as you went through adjusting it to what it is now? Did you feel encumbered by the history of the award and how it was selected?
No. I mean, the original process, at least in 1975, was a literal paper ballot that they passed out and then collected at Origins, and then they tallied the votes up and announced the winners on Saturday night or something like that. So that was like the original structure. One of the, of course, as we probably all know, there was a Charles S. Roberts Awards hiatus between 2014 and 2018. And no awards were awarded in that time until Tim Toe stepped forward and took over and began to operate the process again in 2019. But one of the things that didn't happen to get done for whatever reason during that period was an ironclad process. And while I won't describe our current process as ironclad, at least there's a process, and we have disclosed that process. So we have, not to the extent we'd like necessarily, but there's better transparency now. People have an idea of how that process works. And I'm also not going to claim that process is currently absolutely flawless and airtight. Obviously, it's not. And we, every year we learn something new. We learn something that went wrong that we feel like we need to address. You yourself, Harold, pointed out a problem with the new charter that we created for the 2022 awards. And you said, hey, this is going to be a terminology. Here's going to be a problem. And you were right. It was a problem. So we have to work. We worked to address that problem with the charter changes, which were otherwise relatively minor for the 2023 awards. And I'm sure we will end up making some adjustments for next year as well.
Yeah, I mean, the first step when Gary got involved and I got involved as well was just to get out on awards. I mean, it was critical at that time that we get out some sort of awards that first year. So we really didn't have any time to really think about, what the process was going to be or how it was going to work because it was already in place. And we just had to get an award out. And then the following year, we were then able to take a look at it and determine, what do we want to do? How do we want to change things? And it's not a in stone type thing. I mean, it's something that we constantly reevaluate every year and determine, what would be good changes to make. And we did make some changes this year, and there are some things that worked really well. And there was a couple of things that didn't work so well. And we'll probably make some additional changes going into next year again. I mean, hopefully we'll get to the point where we have, one solid thing, but we don't want to be so inflexible that we can't change with the times.
Yeah. One of the things that we've had to be aware of too is the wargaming hobby is different here in 2024, for example, than it was in 1977 or 1987 or 1997. These communities and these spaces continue to evolve, and we have to be able to address the wargaming hobby and community as it is, and not how we would like it to be in some idealized, perfect utopian world.
Yeah, it seems like as you set up a mechanism for nominations and for selection, you have to balance fair, reasonable, accurate processes with your ability to execute on them, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we can't design the perfect system, and if it were perfect, it might be unmanageable. So I think you guys have done an admirable job of molding a system that you can execute on. And there are things about it that I don't like, and I know that there are things others don't like, but I think it's a nice balance of all factors. So kudos to you guys for the progress.
Well, thanks, Harold. And I mean, that has been a consideration, right? We'd like to have as solid a process as possible. But we also have have to have a process that we can actually execute. I mean, some wonderful ideas have been put forth in various venues, for example, that are just not something we can actually execute. So we're going to continue to try to move ourselves forward. I mean, when I stepped in, it kind of halfway through the process for 2021, not even halfway. We had the votes had been cast at that point. Let me put it that way. But there was like, how do we do this? Right. I mean, we don't have it written down about the exact. I mean, we had, there was a charter that kind of laid out broad policy, but it didn't tell us how to do this. Step 1, step 2, step 3. We didn't have step anything. We had nothing to work with. So the top immediate priority was to establish a process. And we knew even at the time, and we'd all agree, and Ryan will back me up on this, that we knew it was not going to unfold flawlessly, and it didn't. But we have continued to make improvements since then. I am generally pleased with where we are, with the caveat that, there's still room to grow. There's always got to be room for improvement. But as Ryan said, we'd like to get to a process point where we don't have to continue making, process tweaks every year. We have a process, and I'm sure we'll continue to evolve, but a process that we are functionally happy with.
Yeah, I mean, just to give one small example, and I know Gary will back me up on this. In that first full year, we had come up with certain categories and whatnot. We had our list of where things could be nominated, and some of them we knew ended up working really well, and then there was some where we had some issues, and one of the big issues is where do we fit all the games that are more political, more social in nature. And are not so much the kinetic warfare type games. And so we created a new category for those particular games. And I think that worked out very well this year. We had some really good nominations and I can't say the winners yet, but I'm sure we have a great winner as well.
We have fantastic winners in all categories. And yeah, that was obviously something that we were going to need to address. And I didn't feel like we were in a place to address it for that first full year. But obviously it was something that we had to get to in the next year. And I'm comfortable with the way that decision has landed and how it has evolved this year. We have had some issues this year. That was not one of them. I think that was completely smooth.
There's always going to be, as you know, issues from various sides. I mean, we've had people that have complained and been concerned about the fact that these awards are no longer war game awards, that they're going to non-war games, which I mean, don't quite understand.
Okay, I mean, if you count the nominees and give me a list of which ones aren't war games that are nominated in any category other than political, social, or economic war games, then your concerns will be noted and we will talk them through. Well,
we've had those concerns, and then we've had the other concerns on the other side that says we haven't included enough games that are more what we would call, I guess, more fringe games that are not quite, as we said, that kinetic warfare type game. Yeah. I mean, Harold, I mean, you've designed a coin game, Is
that a fringe game? Don't be calling my game a fringe game, Ryan.
I'm not calling it fringe game.
I believe there is fringe depicted somewhere in the game's model.
Oh yeah, like on the outfits of the uniforms. But I mean, I'm sure there are some people out there who would say that that's not truly a war game.
Oh, sure. I can name them if you'd like,
and that they should not be. That should not be up for an award.
Go ahead, please continue.
I'm just saying. I mean, so how do you please both sides of that? And it's really a balancing act that we've been trying to pursue, and I think we've been doing a pretty good job at that so far.
Yeah. Well, I continue to say, only somewhat facetiously, that as long as everybody is mad, we're probably doing something correctly.
Okay.
It's so true, and to be honest, it's not about trying to make as many people happy as possible. It's about determining what the purpose of the award is, right? So what is it going to be? And now that we agree that it's going to be that, we're not going to agree with everybody, but if you all agree, you're the committee that matters. Then let everybody know, inform, transparent, and then charge forward. And if people want, an award for a hex encounter chit game involving the East Front, and that it doesn't fall within, at least happily within, whatever your conduct is, then they can make their own award.
Well, that's true. And it has been my position. And, this was obvious to me. I didn't have to think very hard at all to come to this conclusion that officially, you could take this as an official statement, the Charles S. Roberts Awards are delighted that there are other awards in the wargaming and conflict simulation space. And we are happy to help support those initiatives as well. Different awards are going to award different things. That is completely natural. I mean, if you look at movies, you've got the Screen Actors Guild Awards, which is handed out by the Screen Actors Guild, and the Academy Awards, which is handed out by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. And there's a bunch of public awards too that are just public votes. We are the kind of award we are, and we are happy to acknowledge and support and help out where we can other awards with different goals that happen to overlap into our space.
Yeah, I think, I couldn't agree more, right? I think we need more awards. And I love the idea. I mean, I use awards as recognition for kind of games that I should be playing that I haven't played. They draw my attention. Mm-hmm. And so there are a lot of reasons to have awards and to draw attention to the games. But, I think the obvious reason that you all get so much attention is there's just such a wonderful history behind the Charles S. Roberts Award.
Yeah,
and I think that's really important to remember. I mean, if you're a brand new award, you don't have that obligation, to hold up to. I mean, we're talking since 1975, as you said earlier. So we really do have a history that we have to honor, and an individual we have to honor. And as you mentioned, I think offline, but I'll just say it again. We're very fortunate to have Charles S. Roberts' daughter, Joanne.
Yeah, Joanne has been an absolute delight to have involved in our process. And since we don't have Charlie anymore, we've got Joanne.
Yeah, and it's great that she's invested and involved. And, I've seen her defend the award to detractors. So I love seeing that. I'm glad that she's visible, and we should do what we can to protect her and encourage her continued involvement. It's fantastic.
Just to say this, everybody's entitled to their opinion, right? I am not personally, and I think Ryan and Robert and Joanne and the other people involved are not wounded by criticism. Criticism is an opportunity for us to identify, process, and target problems that we have. So everybody, I am delighted to hear those things. But there is a difference, obviously, between helpful criticism and unhelpful criticism. But even the unhelpful people are still entitled to their opinions.
I agree. I mean, I any type of criticism is fine. I mean, as long as it's focused. I mean, obviously, personal attacks are not what we want to handle or deal with. But I mean,
that would be an example of unhelpful criticism.
That would be very unhelpful.
Gary is ugly, for example, was not no.
No.
Yeah, it may be true. It's just
absolutely.
Fact, Gary, come on.
What a mug on that guy.
He's got that face for radio.
Face for radio, exactly.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the things in the hobby with the need for volunteer help that we all have in our endeavors. I love to see somebody with a criticism, a proposed solution, and the willingness to spend some time to help me fix it. Right. It's a criticism without a solution or time to help fix it is in this where we stand now is useless to me.
One of our challenges going forward is going to be how do we improve engagement with the general public, with the wider board gaming hobby, right? I think that's critical to give us visibility, which is not to say that we want necessarily people who are totally uninvested in war games voting in our process, right? Not that doesn't happen now. Of course it does. Yeah. But we'd like to increase engagement with the public, with the broader board gaming community, with war gamers, and with the publishers and purveyors and designers of war games.
Yeah. And one of my big goals, and I know Gary probably shares this as well, is that I do want to reach that international audience more, both by having more individuals involved on the actual board, the nominating committee, and advisory committees, but also more games from international sources and being able to honor more individuals from all over the world.
And I think we've done a pretty good job at that, especially with Europe. We have done a less awesome job intersecting and engaging with the substantial wargaming communities and publication scenes in East Asia, for example.
Yeah. Yeah. And with South China Sea, I've gotten a lot of exposure to gamers, war gamers in China, right? And really quite extraordinary what's going on there. A lot of games that we just don't see and have visibility into. As a matter of fact, we'd like to grow SDHistCon into a around the earth sort of event where we can get some glimpses into what's going on in the Philippines and in Vietnam and China and other places. So
I always knew your ultimate goal was world domination, Harold.
It is universal.
Okay, yeah, well, that's fine too. You got to get with Elon Musk on the latter goal there.
I hear he's got a rocket.
He does have some rockets, from what I understand.
Well, so there's a committee now that plays an important role in selecting, nominating. I guess is probably the way to say it, and perhaps the debate over what categories and how to structure the awards. What's the process of attracting the best and the brightest and making sure that you have coverage of all of the vast things that we do as a group?
Well, I mean, that's never going to be airtight. Essentially, the process now, I think it was obvious to folks in like 2019, 2020 that there were some irregularities in the process that folks were not generally comfortable with. And I'm not even talking here about, well, that game is not a war game and that kind of stuff. I'm talking about this game won a map award and there's no map in the box. This game won an award, or was nominated at least, and it had released like 7 years earlier. So what we needed was some kind of process that democratizes the nomination process. So it's not just Gary's making the decisions, because no, we won't be doing that. At the same time, gives us some degree of governance and curation about what exactly gets nominated. And a great deal of attention is paid inside our process to making sure that games that are up for an award for that year are actually released in that year. For example, that was an obvious thing that was coming up before that we were pretty uncomfortable with. So that is, we take suggestions from the board as to who might be deserving of a spot on the nominating committee, and then we send out a bunch of emails. And of course, that develops exactly as you'd expect, where some people just don't get back to us. But then we form a nominating committee, and that nominating committee has a couple of meetings and a nomination process in which Ryan has been absolutely invaluable. I'd be actually probably deceased by this point if I had to do all that work. And then at the end, we have a ballot that goes out to the entire nominating committee, and that ballot determines what nominees actually get to be nominees and what games do not quite make the cut, as great games as they might be. Not every game can become a nominee, for example.
Well, it brings up an interesting question. We had some discussion on, I guess it was BGG, perhaps. I don't really follow Consim World Forums, but wouldn't be surprised if it was there as well. But there was a very popular World War II solo game that was not nominated, but seemed to be very popular. And there were questions about that, and just wanted to give you the chance to talk about that and what it means.
Well, the game in question, I mean, we might as well not be coy because everybody will figure it out. Was Mike Ranella's solitaire game, and it was very warmly received. It is, by all accounts, I haven't played it personally, so I can't speak to it, but it is, by all accounts, an outstanding game. And ultimately, at the end of the day, in the couple of categories in which it was part of the process, right? It was on the nominating committee's list of games to be considered. And at the end of the day, it just didn't get the votes. It's just a bit of a hard luck story for Mike and his game that is, by all accounts, outstanding. And we were pleased to observe that it has gotten recognition elsewhere.
Yeah, it will, and it'll certainly have is having good commercial success too. So,
Mhm.
So I don't think it.
No, I was
Yeah, go
gonna
ahead,
say, it's a good example though of the learning process.
Yes.
Because we didn't just say and tune it out and say, oh, we don't want to hear it. It didn't get nominated. Don't talk to us. This is the way it is. We learned from that process and looked and evaluated our the way we did things, and then we can take that going forward and say, well, do we need to make an appropriate change that may allow for certain games to come in, and maybe we do votes a little differently moving forward. I mean, there's a lot of things we can learn from even an experience like that.
Yeah, I think one of the other questions that comes out of that is the composition of the board, right? Is that of that committee? Is it a committee that sees enough stuff? And I'm not. That's not an accusation. That's just a question. And I don't know how you create a committee that sees enough.
It's a tough challenge.
Yeah.
Without a 200-person committee, which would obviously be completely unmanageable, right? We have gone out of our way, and I think we've done a good job, but there's always room for improvement of creating and nominating committees with a diverse array of voices. I do not want to populate a committee with everybody who just nods their head to whatever Gary or Ryan says. That would be an incredibly unhelpful committee. So we've got a little bit, there's definitely some areas where we'd like to improve. From a technical standpoint, one of the things we'll probably do, and this will be in the charter, or at least in the nominating committee rules, I think we'll probably move to some kind of ranked choice ballot for that final nominating committee ballot. I think that would work out better, and that would result in fewer ties at either the top or bottom of the ballot, and that will eliminate some of the oddities that we saw with the nominating committee results this year in terms of categories that had either less or more than 5, which is our target for nominees. We're not committed to 5. There doesn't have to be 5. But in some cases, there were oddball pileups at the bottom of the ballot that we'd rather be able to address via the wishes of the people on the nominating committee rather than, us making the decisions at the end of the process.
Yeah. Do you all talk about numbers of ballots, number of votes, number of board members, all of those things? Can I ask questions about that?
So the members of the board are listed on our website, the CharlesSRobertsAwards.com, and we do announce the names of both the nominating committee and the Hall of Fame jury each year. We have never, and I did have a conversation with Roger about this. The Charles S. Roberts Awards have never announced a number of ballots cast. I think I'd like to move in that direction in the service of transparency. What I can tell you is that we had about 20% more ballots cast this year than last year. And last year had about 8 or 9, as I recall, percent more ballots cast than the previous year. The balloting process that we're using is through Google Forms, which does have some limitations. It is not possible using that platform for us to completely forbid somebody from casting multiple ballots without requiring the voters to sign into Google, meaning they need to have a Google account. And we didn't want to restrict it in that way. So that's why the constant admonitions from me saying, please only vote once. That hasn't been a huge problem. We have had to kind of screen that. And I think last year we had like a half a dozen duplicate ballots cast, and we combined those where we could. We had more than that this year, but we had more ballots cast this year too.
I mean, the board definitely does go over all those numbers and receives a report back from Gary as regards the number of ballots ever cast and people that participated and all that kind of stuff, so we can make those decisions going forward. But I'm in complete agreement with Gary that I think we need to really consider moving even further forward with transparency on that and getting that out to the public.
And what that probably sounds like is, some point after the process is completed. Right now, we're really focused on completing the 2023 awards, which should be announced very soon.
Oh,
very soon.
Very soon.
And you could blame either myself or Dan, but it's really my fault that you won't see it this weekend. Actually, we're really close.
It would be very soon.
It would be very soon, but we're not going to make it quite that soon.
Can you give us a window?
We would officially know. I hope to have the announcements next weekend.
Yeah.
The announcements be made public next weekend.
Nobody's watching, so you can tell me whatever you want.
So if there are any issues, we don't make that date, please send your complaints to haroldbuchanan@gmail.com.
Good. I'm glad you got that memorized. There's another thing I wanted to talk about as it related to categories. It might be interesting to hear your thoughts and how we define some of these things. There's a magazine category.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, my interest in magazines is that I think a magazine is not just recap, either a game or a recap of the history around a game, but would also have some relevance to the culture of what we all do.
Mm-hmm.
And there are rich histories of that in Moves Magazine and Fire and Movement and other magazines, right? That weren't just company canon. And so I'm interested in first of all, you know, kind of, it seems like in the past we have magazines that are excellent magazines, but they have games in history.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't touch, probably intentionally don't touch the culture. And then the other question is a little wilder and maybe nonsensical, but are things like, you know, the standouts to me are something like Player's Aid, right?
Mm-hmm.
The work that they do would seem to be a magazine by any definition after 1970.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you think about it? The Charles S. Roberts definition of magazine.
Well, this is something we have had fairly extensive discussions about, and it's a valid question. And, you know, print is dying as a medium, right? Maybe not books, but magazines and newspapers, definitely. And wargaming is one of the few places where print magazines retain some degree of relevance. So we have every intention, unless the landscape changes dramatically in a way we would rather not see, we absolutely intend to maintain a category for print magazines. But one of the things that was attempted back in the 2018-2019 era was to kind of have categories that encapsulated some of those things like commentary. We were not happy with the way those categories were structured at the time. So in the name of efficiency and because we couldn't come up with good formulations for those categories without having 6 categories for those things, which again turns it into where there's really a lot of categories and more than we felt we could handle. So don't be shocked to see us address this, although I don't have a concrete answer for you right now, because that will be one of the things that we discuss moving into the 2024 awards process, is how do we handle digital commentary on wargaming, right? Digital magazines, YouTube channels, blogs, articles that might appear. We had a very, very unstructured process before where you would have blog posts and YouTube videos and scholarly articles that were printed in DoD journals all lumped into the same category. And that felt very wrong, like we were comparing apples, oranges, and 88 millimeter anti-tank, anti-aircraft guns all in the same category.
Yeah, I think it's a really difficult thing to deal with. I mean, when you're trying to give an award just to a magazine itself, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Let's just take a pure written paper magazine, okay? Does the award go to the magazine as a whole?
Mm-hmm.
Does the award go to as a magazine only if it has a game and then that entirety? Does the award go just to the game and then within a certain category? Or does the award go to articles within that particular magazine? And that's been done differently over the past just 5 years alone. So that's been a real challenge there. And even we have changed it a little bit here and there. So we're constantly looking at that and trying to figure that out. And then, as you said, do you have these digital entities as something completely separate in a separate category, or do they then roll into one category with the other magazines? I mean, Harold, you're involved with quite a few of those yourself, and what you are doing is very much often blurring those lines. And so I think that's a really interesting question to get into. And it's not one I really thought about previously, but it's making me think about it going forward as we're looking at how do we do the awards next year.
I think I've said this publicly, but I was really hoping that somebody, some enterprising individual would create and curate and run a set of wargaming media awards that would cover things like YouTube channels and blog posts and BGG reviews and stuff like that, so that the CSRs wouldn't need to handle them. But nobody has seen fit to do that yet.
Yeah.
And we had to focus on what we focused on because we had to take something that was, well, frankly, about to fall apart.
Nebulous, let's say.
And make sure it wasn't going to fall apart. And then make sure it was on solid footing. And if we had got away from the core focus and got into all these other things, the best blog, best podcast, but it just would have been untenable going forward. And so we had to make sure we had the basics done, and then we can look at other things.
Yeah, I hear you. And one of the questions it raises in my head is, what is the purpose of the Charles S. Roberts Award, right? And it, something I can't answer, and would be great if Mr. Roberts were available, right, to talk through this, because life has changed, and we have a small number of these 1950s magazines that have a game in them and talk about history, and all wonderful, right? And if that's the definition of what we do, the Charles S. Roberts Award, I don't mean to say we, but then we're good. But if the purpose of the Charles S. Roberts Award is to encompass the culture around the games that we play, then there's a broader responsibility to make sure that it's not just the 1950s definition of magazines.
I would love to have that conversation with Charles S. Roberts. I mean, don't forget that even he and his life changed his focus dramatically.
Yeah.
I mean, he obviously was the innovator that we think of, but he moved on. He got rid of the company. He moved on, and he was mostly focused on his other hobbies like trains and things. So, I would love to know what he thinks of some of this, and I think that's definitely something we need to be thinking about and focusing on looking forward. But at the same time, the world has changed, as you said, and so we need to be cognizant of that and be making awards that is not a 1950s award, that is a 21st century award.
It is important. I really want to make sure that I say this, though. It's as important as it is, and it's critically important for us to recognize the state of the wargaming hobby today with what we're trying to accomplish. It's equally important for us to recognize the legacy and history of the Charles S. Roberts Awards and of Charles S. Roberts, right? The CSRs are not going to get away from recognizing excellence in Hex Encounter wargames. That is not an objective we have. We are committed to retaining recognition of excellence in the Hex Encounter traditional wargame space, right? But we also have to recognize that that's not the entirety of our space anymore, and it frankly hasn't been since the late 1970s. So we need to recognize the realities of the hobby that we're actually in.
I would be remiss in my duties if I didn't end it on that tirade, Gary. So thank you for that.
That was exceptionally mild as tirades go, I gotta tell you.
It's still a tirade. So love it. It's what we all showed up for. And we also got a nice closing comment there from the great Mark Herman, who has a wall dedicated to all of the CSRs.
He has one. We might in future have Mark Herman Awards, in fact.
Yeah. Good. Well, let him know. I've had that discussion with him. It is, and I'm a 2-time Charles S. Roberts Award winner, so I have a vested interest in maintaining the history and carry around the great honor that comes with this austere award and the history associated with it. So thank you guys for all you do. I know it's hard and it's death by 1,000 bee stings, but keep fighting the good fight and let us all know how we can help. And thanks for talking to me today.
Harold, it's been an absolute pleasure, and we're happy to have had this conversation.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Thank you so much.
See you in 15 minutes.
Yep.
Take care.